Hey everyone, it's Jananie from the channel This Story Ain't Over, and welcome back to another episode of #EpicBookRecs. So this is the monthly series that I do here on the Epic Reads channel, where I recommend a bunch of books based on a certain theme. So I've done a bunch of fun and exciting themes before, and you can find everything from fantasy book recs to YA romances to out-of-this-world sci-fi book recs, so you can definitely go check them all out in the playlist down below. So for this month's theme, since most of the people in the Northern Hemisphere are experiencing spring being here, you know, the warmer weather, just the brighter mood with the more sunlight, I thought it would be just really nice to get some spring feeling book recs. So some of these are books that actually take place in the spring, and then a bunch of these are just books that I feel like channel the vibe of spring, like that flowery feeling, that warm feeling, but also that idea of renewal and rebirth and that kind of thing. So there's just a mixed bag of books here. I've got everything from romances to fantasy to like poetry, and I think you'll definitely enjoy any of these. And these are actually a mix of books that I've read and haven't read, so I'm excited to actually try out a bunch of these. Alright, so the first book that I want to talk about is one that I'm currently in the middle of and absolutely loving. It is just so fun and wonderful and like a straight shot of serotonin to your veins, and that is Charming as a Verb by Ben Philippe. And I was so excited to pick this up because it seemed like a bit of a romance but also a coming of age story, and it follows our main character Henry Haltiwanger, and he is the son of Haitian immigrants, and he lives in New York City, very vibrant New York City, which really comes alive off the page in this book. And Halty attends this really prestigious academy called Fate, and it's for like these really highly achieving New York kids, and it's always been his and his father's dream to get him into Columbia. But Halty is a very kind of charming character. You get this from the very first page. He's just the type of guy who has 10 different smiles for every type of person, and he's always trying to charm the socks off of anyone. And so he happens to have a little dog walking business that he kind of has on the side to earn him extra money, but what people don't know is that it's a bit of a scam. So Halty knows that a lot of people don't want to give their dogs to a, you know, teenager in New York who isn't affiliated with anyone else. So he created this kind of fake dog walking agency called the Uptown Updog, and he has like a whole website and setup and everything to kind of fool people into thinking that he's from this bigger agency, and so they're more likely to pay him more and actually let him walk their dogs. But things start to go a little bit awry when Halty's neighbor in his building, named Corinne Troy, and who also goes to his school and who happens to be a very kind of standoffish girl who doesn't really know how to kind of navigate the school norms. When she finds out about his less than honest dog walking scheme, they end up making a deal so that she keeps Halty's secret, which is that he will help her kind of navigate the school norms and help her become a little bit more popular and kind of change her image at school, because she's come off as very intimidating to a lot of people. So it's this kind of really cute situation where they're kind of like enemies at the beginning, but they're soon going to learn to fall in love. So far this has been super cute, and I'm just so excited to dive more in and see the sparks fly between Halty and Corinne. Alright, so speaking of romance and sparks flying, the next book I want to recommend is Happily Ever Afters by Elise Bryant, and you can already tell from the cover of this book that it just feels a lot like spring with all of the flowers. But basically this book follows her main character Tessa Johnson, who is a 16-year-old girl who has always been a little bit introverted, and she has never felt like the protagonist in her own life. But she's always been writing stories, especially love and romance stories, and she's only ever shared them with her best friend Caroline. But when she's given the opportunity to start this creative writing program, she jumps on the chance, but when she ends up there, she finds herself at a loss for words. So in order to break her writing block, her friend suggests that she should probably try to find some real-life inspiration. And this is where we have our love interest enter, named Nico, who is this kind of mysterious and brooding artist, and Tessa is going to use a list of romance novel-inspired activities to do with Nico to cultivate this kind of happily ever after love story. But with each item that she sort of checks off her list, she starts to find that maybe this is more than she bargained for, and she starts to risk losing her heart. This seems like it's going to be super, super cute. I've already heard so many people tell me that this is such a fun and sweet read, and I think it's just going to be the perfect thing to pick up on a sunny Saturday afternoon with like a little picnic in spring. Alright, on a totally different note, I wanted to recommend a couple fantasies, and actually these are the first and second book in a series. So Bone Criers Moon and Bone Criers Dawn by Catherine Purdy. So Bone Criers Dawn just came out, and it is the sequel to Bone Criers Moon. And I actually read Bone Criers Moon last year, and I really, really loved it. It is a really kind of immersive fantasy that feels a little bit like a fairy tale. So in this version of the world, there are these people called Bone Criers, who are these women who are tasked with ferrying the souls of the dead to the underworld. And the Bone Criers are kind of like witches. They have magical abilities that they draw from the bones of the animals that they kill. But each Bone Crier, before she can take on her sacred duty, must complete her rite of passage, which includes meeting the boy that they are destined to love and killing them. So the book follows three different main characters. There's Aless, who has been trained to become a Bone Crier all her life, and she is destined to kill her one true love. And then we have Bastion, whose father was actually killed by a Bone Crier, and he has always kind of held on to this fury and vengeance that he wants to take out on the Bone Criers. And then our last point of view character is Sabine, who is Aless's best friend, and she has always kind of struggled to be a Bone Crier. She's never really come to terms with the idea of killing another being, but things start to go awry when Aless is supposed to do her rite of passage, and Bastion ends up being the boy who she is destined to love. But Bastion, who is bent on revenge, ends up kidnapping Aless, and Sabine is left to try and save her friend. And so these three characters end up in situations that they never expected themselves to be in, and there is a bit of a love story as well. But the thing I loved about this, and the thing that I think really fits the spring, is that it feels a lot like a fairy tale with a little bit of a dark side. And I just really loved how specific and interesting the magic system is, and the idea of the Bone Criers and how they draw their power from these bones that they've kind of cultivated from creatures that they have killed. And also just the tension between, you know, having to kill your one true love. That's just so awesome, and I think it's just a really fun read, so definitely go check it out, and I am excited to pick up the sequel. Alright, the next book that I wanted to recommend is a novel slash poetry book, and that is If I Tell You the Truth by Jasmine Kaur. So this is Jasmine Kaur's second book, and her first book was called When You Ask Me Where I'm Going, and it was a bit of a poetry collection. But in that poetry collection, there were some short stories of a character named Kiran and her daughter Sahara. So this book actually follows Kiran and Sahara, and it is the full kind of novel and story about them. And basically Kiran is leaving Punjab for a new start in Canada after a sexual assault leaves her pregnant. And this actually spans a lot of time, I think, because Kiran's daughter Sahara actually becomes a POV character as well at some point. But it's just this story of, you know, dealing with trauma, but also, you know, living in a place that may not necessarily welcome you right at the beginning. And it is told in a mix of prose and poetry, which I think is just super powerful. And the reason I wanted to recommend this as kind of a spring book to read is because I think there's this idea and, you know, feeling of rebirth and rejuvenation and blooming in spring. And I think that this is a story of trauma, but also one of learning to grow and to bloom into yourself. And I think that's just a very interesting thing. So I'm very excited to pick this up. And I absolutely loved Jasmine Kaur's poetry collection, so I cannot wait to read the poems in this one. On a similar note of kind of rebirth and blooming, I thought I would recommend Yolk by Mary H.K. Choi. I recently read this, and if any of you have been following me on my channel, you know that I did a whole reading vlog for this and absolutely fell in love with this book. I have loved Mary H.K. Choi's books before, but this one just hit differently because it follows a sister relationship, which I thought was just so interesting. It follows Jane, who is the younger sister of June, and they are both sisters who grew up in Texas. They're Korean American, and they both ended up moving to New York. June is working in New York, and Jane is, I think, in her junior year of college. And now they are in a very kind of fraught and tense place. Their relationship has kind of deteriorated since coming to New York, but things kind of change when June finds out that she has cancer, and the two of them are brought together by this news and forced to kind of interact again as Jane helps take care of June, and they are kind of confronting their fraught relationship and trying to mend it. I will say this book does have some triggers for especially eating disorders, so be careful of that, but I think overall this was just a story of, you know, growing and regrowing and, you know, trying to mend relationships that you think you've lost. It was such an interesting and also funny read at times as well, because the two of them have such great banter, and being in Jane's head is very interesting because she is a quite flawed character and you just relate to her a lot throughout the book. So yeah, highly recommend if you're looking for a really interesting family dynamic, because this one will not disappoint. Alright, and the final book that I want to recommend is one that actually takes place in the spring from what I can tell, and that is Tokyo Ever After by Amiko Jean. And I'm super excited about this book because it seems like a little bit of a Princess Diaries situation. It follows our main character Zumi Tanaka, who is a Japanese American teen who has really struggled with her identity all her life, and it's always been kind of her and her mother against the world because she never really knew her father. But when she stumbles upon a few clues that lead to the fact that her father happened to be the crown prince of Japan. She finds herself in a situation where she is whisked to Japan and, you know, made to be this like princess. She is a princess. And she's starting to discover, you know, this country that she never really knew and, you know, family that she never really heard of. And she's thrown into this royal life with all of these customs and traditions that she's had no idea of. And so she's kind of a fish out of water again. And it's just this really cool kind of Princess Diaries situation that I'm so excited for. I love that it's also set in Tokyo, which is going to be really interesting. And I just cannot wait to see how this plays out. I also believe there's a little bit of a romance, which seems really exciting. And I just love the idea of like royals and princesses. So very excited for this. And I just wish I had a little crown like her on the cover. All right, but those were all the books that I wanted to talk about today for some spring book recs. I hope you will pick up one of these very soon and have a relaxing afternoon in the sun with a cute read. But as always, please leave me your recommendations down below for the theme today. I would love to hear everything you guys have to say. And thank you so much for watching. I'm Jananie from the channel The Story Ain't Over, and I will see you in the next episode of #EpicBookRecs. Bye!